We're gathered here today to celebrate a public commitment to religious life in the Society of Jesus. Dunstan, John Bosco, and Tirangela have spent the last 2 years of their lives reflecting in very great depth on how the Lord is calling them to serve him. And they've come to the conclusion that it is as Jesuits, which is to say companions of Jesus, followers of what St. Ignatius called a pathway to God, on which you surrender your life to Jesus Christ. The vows which they will shortly make are expressive of that act of surrender, a handing over to God of the most important dimensions of our lives, the things that we call our own, the people we love, and the course we set for our future. Usually when I preach at one of these vows masses, I've had a go at explaining why each of those vows is a valuable countercultural way of life, answering difficult questions like, why be poor when everyone wants to own stuff? Why be chaste when so much of life today is saturated by sexuality? Why be obedient when personal autonomy is the supreme value of our culture? Well, this year I sense there's a little bit of a change in the air. A tide is turning, accentuated by the experience of the pandemic and the lockdown. I think more and more people are waking up to the difficulties of the value system which has dominated life in Britain over the last few years, making us a society that, on the one hand, exalts personal fulfillment as the most important thing in life, but also makes us slaves in all sorts of different and often subtle ways. Few of us are startled, I think, these days to see young people looking for something beyond individualism, beyond self-expression. Because nowadays we're confronted by the difficulties that those values have caused us in terms of our society, our morals, and also very much the effect it's had on our environment. People know that it's time for a change. It's just that none of us can quite work out what that change will look like. Well, that's the urgent context in which you need to understand what the three men taking vows are about to do in this celebration. This commitment to put ourselves to one side so that God can take center stage and be at the heart of things. Because it's fairly clear at this stage, isn't it, that only God can save us. God whose spirit has stirred these three young Jesuits to praise, reverence, and serve him. The spirit that, according to the Jesuit poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. Tirangela's, Dunstan's, and John Bosco's act of commitment is part of God's outreach to a world in peril. People the world over so badly in need of love and compassion, wisdom and mercy, will receive those things thanks to the ministry of these three men, through the intellectual work that they'll accomplish, through the sacraments that they will celebrate, through the networks of relationship and solidarity that they will build, and through that capacity for keen listening to the longings of the human heart, which will be their special hallmark. In all sorts of ways, they'll contribute to that new way of living, which we trust and we hope God has in store for his world. As I look at them, they're all sitting up, rather pleased with themselves after the way that I've put all of that, because that way of telling the story rather gives the impression that we're in the company of heroes. And much as I like and admire all of them, I don't think of them as heroes, and you shouldn't either. And it's St. Paul in that difficult first reading who shows us why we shouldn't. This is Paul being really rough, even quite nasty, to be honest. It's a really hard reading to get across. His biting sarcasm reminds me of how school teachers used to speak to us in the 1970s. He's doing something exceptionally difficult in this passage of his letter to the Corinthians. He's criticizing the people reading the letter. because the difficult Christians of Corinth are a bunch of super sophisticated converts to the new faith. They're Londoners, if you like, can I put it like that? They think they know it all, and they don't rate Paul too highly because he speaks a little bit too simplistically. Fortunately for them, there's another apostle called Apollos, who's a cut above, much more at their cultural level, if you get what I'm saying. Well, essentially, the Corinthians are treating the apostles as entertainment. They think it's an episode of Corinth's Got Talent. One minute there's an intense homily from Paul, and then a dazzling, impassioned speech from Apollos showing his immense learning. And the good parishioners sit there arguing about which of them was better. I don't know how you would tackle that if you were on the receiving end of it. I suspect I would try and curry favor with my fan base in the group if I was lucky enough to have one, because it's very flattering to the ego to be thought of as a better apostle than everybody else. But Paul doesn't do that. He goes for the jugular. He jeers and he lampoons and he shames people for behaving like an audience. And he does it in a psychologically very astute way, unmasking what's really going on, which is what goes on in all those juries on talent shows. Under the guise of applauding or criticizing the performance on stage, the judges, in effect, they become center stage themselves. We all know, don't we, that Simon Cowell and the rest of them are playing a game, adopting a persona to amuse us, and we laugh and we groan and play our part in the drama. But when all is said and done, this is a deeply insidious format. It's a game all about power, in which the judges hold all the cards. The people on the stage, the ones actually doing the hard work, are at best reduced to pathetic gratitude. I think you can tell I'm not too keen on talent shows myself, but Paul would have hated them because all his sympathies are with the poor people on the stage, the hard-working, long-suffering apostles. Listen to what he says. We are hungry and we're thirsty. We're poorly clothed and beaten and homeless, and we grow weary for our work. When reviled, we bless. When persecuted, we endure. When slandered, we speak kindly. We've become like the rubbish of the world, the dregs of all things. Can you hear the spirit of the vows? Poverty, chastity, obedience. We're not superstars, we're not meant to be, and we don't want to be. That's why it would be totally against the spirit of what we're doing today, to put Dunstan, John Bosco, and Tirangelo on a plinth and admire them, even if we do admire them and are grateful to them for what they're doing. They are not heroes. They're not there to entertain and amuse us. Paul tells the Corinthians that they must think of the apostles as galley slaves. That's the word he used in yesterday's reading. Big, muscular chaps whose job is to row in the hull of the ship. And he sees the Corinthians swanning around on deck, admiring the strength or not of the people doing the rowing. But the point is not to admire or criticize, it's to get down there into the action, to join them. Take up your oar and follow me. Because if you look carefully, you'll find that it's not just Paul and Apollos down there in the engine room. You'll find Jesus there too, rowing with all his strength. Jesus alongside his servants, alongside his followers, sharing the lot of his companions. That's where we all want to be, if only we knew it, with Jesus in the engine room. And that's what our three brothers are doing today, simply taking their seats in the galley alongside the Lord. They're getting involved in the action, his action. From now on, in the most public way, they will be identified as companions of his. They're giving themselves totally without reserve to the mission of God, the God who Jesus serves and which Jesus embodies, a mission to bring healing to the world, a mission of justice and of reconciliation. They're promising to continue their formation right to its end so that they'll live in this order forever, this order in which they've found the right pattern for their lives. And they've done that because it's the order in which they happen to have found Jesus. In the spirit of their commitment, we don't admire from a distance, even if our hearts are stirred to gratitude. Instead, we allow ourselves gently but firmly to be put in question, to ask how we too might be challenged to go where they have gone, moved by the spirit of life which broods over a bent world in dire need of compassion and of healing.